This episode of the Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by our friends at GWT2 Energy. Do you want to increase the profit margins of your restaurant or retail operation? One way to do that is to lower your energy costs. With over 20 years experience helping restaurants and retailers reduce their energy bills, GWT2 Energy helps owners and operators create a customized energy savings plan that will achieve up to 25% energy savings. To start saving and become more profitable, visit gwt2energy.com. That's the number 2, gwt2energy.com. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darren Shearer, and this is the show that helps marketplace Christians explore and apply God's will for business, which I'm convinced is to cultivate company cultures that reflect and reveal Jesus Christ. And that's with whatever measure of influence we have in our companies, whether you're at the entry level or you're the CEO of the company, like our guest Joel Manby has been many times. Joel, drawing on over 25 years of CEO experience of major corporations, Joel wrote Love Works, in which he introduces us to the power of agape love. That's the God kind of love. That's not just if you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, but the God kind of unconditional love in the workplace. Love Works has sold over 100,000 copies, and a new expanded version was just released a couple of months ago. Previously, Joel was CEO of SeaWorld and served as CEO of Hershon Enterprises, an entertainment company with brands such as the Harlem Globetrotters and Dollywood. Additionally, he spent 20 years in general management in the auto industry. After he went undercover on the hit TV show Undercover Boss, which was a great episode, y'all ought to go back. I'm pretty sure it's still on Hulu or Netflix.
Netflix, I think.
Yeah, you can definitely get it out there. His episode was the second most popular program on all of U.S. television during the week it aired, and second to only American Idol. And I think, Joe, it might have been number one if you had done that Johnny Cash routine I saw floating around on the internet. But he does just a great sort of cover of Folsom
Prison, yeah.
Prison Blues. And
except it's COVID.
Yeah, except it's
blues.
COVID. It's COVID. And he's got some genius lyrics to just singing the blues about this COVID experience that we're going through right now. Joel, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Darren, it's great to be on the program. And I think if you just Google YouTube, Folsom Prison or COVID prison, I think it'll pop up. I know Undercover Boss is on YouTube as well, if it's not on Netflix. But anyway, thanks for that introduction.
Oh, yeah. This thing's going viral. And so we really want to camp out on this concept of Love Works. And I think, Joel, before I came across this book and heard you on some different shows, even years ago, I had not really heard this concept of love show up in the workplace. It just seems like something that you might hear about in church or in a marriage conference or something like that. But in the workplace, why is it hard for business leaders to talk about love in the workplace?
It's a great question, because I actually spent the first 20 years of my career, Darren, looking for this kind of leadership. And I was in the auto industry, and it was very autocratic, very fear-based. And even as the leader of Saab North America there, I just didn't see role models. And I kept thinking, I had this huge angst inside that I want to lead a better way, but I didn't have any role models. And so it wasn't until I got to Hershon and went to the theme park business there as CEO and chairman that I really was taught by the Hershons that you could love and get great results. And I think I'm not the only one that feels that angst all the time. I think there's a lot of people that long for better leadership, long for leaders they can really respect and that treat them the right way, but they don't see it. I think the reasons why there's a lot, but I think the top couple are most leaders are afraid of how they're going to be perceived because they perceive love as soft. And as we can get into, it's not soft at all. It actually is hard to do. And it also gets great results. I think people are afraid of how they'll be perceived, again, along the line of being too soft, or they're afraid that it's not going to work because they haven't seen it other places. It's certainly not because they don't think it's important, because Jesus made it really clear it's the number one commandment of all. Yet, for some reason, we're afraid to take it in the workplace. And that's why I'm thankful for my experience at Hershey.
Yeah. I mean, and if we're not leading with love, and you've really pioneered this phrase, if we're not leading with love in our organizations, what are we most likely, what's left? What are we leading with?
Yeah, I think it is either our own power. We're trying to lead with our own just IQ, competence, which can be very self-serving, and maybe too focused on ourselves. I think, and that's what you end up with, either fear or your fear-based leadership, autocratic leadership, too much control. But when you start leading with love, you actually transition. And this is a tough transition for most people, and some of it's age thing. But you start transitioning to, my job as a leader is to make other people better, to make them great leaders, not to do well myself. And that's how you can grow and scale a company. So I think that's another big point of why love is such an important leadership principle.
Yeah. So we're going to get into some of the practical applications of what this looks like. But first, for those of our listeners that might be still a little bit skeptical about, this sounds a little bit too soft, Joel. I don't think this is really what's going to move the needle for us. How effective has this Love Works approach been for you?
Well, let me step back to answer that, because it's a really important question. And I'm glad you asked it, in that most people wouldn't perceive it as being really a great thing for the numbers too. And let's face it, in business, we have to hit the numbers. Here's an interesting stat from Gallup. Gallup's been doing customer survey, basically employee engagement scores, for 50 years. And for about 50 years, it's remained pretty flat, that only 30% of employees give the top score on their engagement. So only 30% of employees feel they're engaged in their work at the top level, which I think is a really horrifically bad score. But when we would go into Hershey properties, we would buy something and put these LoveWorks principles in place. Within 3 years, and it typically takes 3 years, we would see engagement scores go from as low as 15% or 30% all the way to 70 or 80%, which is absolutely world class. 80% of people fully engaged. That's like Disney. That's like Apple. These are world class scores. And yet usually the frontline people didn't change. It was the leadership that had to change. We saw turnover go down. We saw profitability go up, cash flow go up. And at the same time, the most important thing is our engagement scores went up with our frontline. That made our guest experience better, and our guest experience scores went up. In fact, in Stone Mountain in Atlanta, which is one of the properties we ran for the state of Georgia, they were at 70% engagement. And 3 years later, they were the best in our entire enterprise at 85% top box engagement scores. That's just one example of the power of putting these principles into place. And what I'll add to that is I think, and I'd love to get into this more if we have time, the key reason I think it works so well is we don't just talk about do goals, meaning you got to hit a profit margin, or you've got to hit a sales goal, or how many people on a podcast. We also, then that's kind of what you do every day. We also spend just as much time talking about the B goals. What kind of leader do you want to be? And how do you go about doing the what? And the what compared to the how is really how we differentiated it. The how was defined as these 7 words of love. So we taught our leaders those 7 words, and we actually held them accountable to them. And so it did really get results, and it's the proofs in the numbers.
Mm. And you said something so powerful, many things there, but one that stuck out to me was that you had to replace the leadership, not the front line. And right. So I think maybe a lot of there may be some myths out there in the minds of some of our listeners, and certainly, probably none of our listeners, but around, in other companies, that, well, we just need to get better people. And really it's the leadership that's the issue. Can you expound on that a
Yeah,
little bit?
absolutely. And I'm not saying certainly there were frontline folks that weren't working out and you have to make a change sometimes. But for the most part, it all starts at the top. It really is true. If your leadership doesn't support it, if your management team doesn't support it, it's going to be much, much harder for the front line to make it happen. Having said that, there are multiple examples, and I give a few in my book that talk about what a great impact you can have no matter what your level is in the company. But having said that, to make transformational change in the whole company, your leadership needs to be completely on board. And the good thing is, typically, I'd say 80% of the time, those people self-selected out because it was more difficult. Sometimes, it's easier just to live by the numbers and say, if you don't hit your attendance figures, you're out, and I'll find somebody else who can hit that number. That's kind of the auto industry. Whereas in our company, success was both the do and the be. You had to have a balance. And if people didn't buy into that, they tended to self-select out, although sometimes we had to have difficult decisions. But I would say at Stone Mountain, probably 40% of the leadership turned over, including the number one person. But that wasn't always the case, but it was often the case. And as I'm hearing my words, it sounds a little crass. I can tell you there's never been a firing or a release that I felt good about, that I enjoyed. I hated every single one of them. But in the end of the day, if they're not backing the company's strategy on culture, it's time to make a change. And I think that's important for anyone listening to know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because ultimately you're not just marketing products and services, you're marketing culture. Right.
Especially in today's world, Darren. I mean, you know it as well as or better than I do. Your generation, the next generation after you, are even more concerned with how the employees are treated, the guests is treated, whether it's all the issues out there today, right? We could touch on all of them. You have to be a better company, I think, than when I was growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially in the service industry. I mean, your culture is your product.
That's
right?
Exactly right. And you're right. It's not, maybe in some other technology companies, it's not as critical, but I still think it's critical because it all comes through somehow. Right. But you're right. In service industries, it's indispensable.
Yeah. And so you've written this book, Love Works, 7 Timeless Principles for Effective Leaders. And these principles are timeless because they come from the Bible, and there's 7 because they come from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter.
Yes.
A business book based an organizational leadership book based on the love chapter. And so for those who they're just to refresh anyone's memory, love is patient, love is kind. And so you've gone through and identified these 7 principles: patient, kind, trusting, unselfish, truthful, forgiving, dedicated. Which one of these would you say is typically the most difficult, or maybe which one or two of these is typically the most difficult for business managers and leaders?
Well, I'm going to answer that, but let me start with one thing about those words, because and what the book goes into this. But each one, in and of itself, may not be understandable on the surface, or may be misunderstood. And I'll give an example. But we had 3 to 4 behaviors for each word. So call it 21, 3 times 7, 21 behaviors that we taught. So, for instance, to answer your question, for me, truthfulness was always the most difficult one because I'm a people pleaser. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. So I don't like to disappoint others. I tend to tell them a little bit what they want to hear versus what absolutely they need to hear. Now, I've learned as CEO, obviously you can't do that. So I learned away from it, but my natural instinct was to not always tell the absolute truth. So one of the behaviors was, does your employee know exactly where they stand? Because there should never be any surprises, especially in Christian organizations, frankly. And I've been on board of many. I find that that's their biggest weakness is there's a tendency to be too nice and not hold people accountable. And then the good people leave because the people aren't so hot, stick around and aren't held accountable. That is a very, very common tale. And so if you said the one word for Christian organizations, I would say, make sure you're being truthful. And the book goes through how to do that. There's a way to do that and still leave the other person with their dignity. And for instance, under patience, we always had one of the definitions or behaviors under patience was to praise in public, admonish in private. Very, very common sense point. But the truth is many people don't do it, right? They admonish people publicly. They embarrass them. They do it without leaving the person's dignity intact. And, it happened to me at Saab. Even when I was CEO of Saab, I traveled to Sweden and got beat up for an entire 4-hour period for missing a quarter. And literally, I'm emotionally checked out on that. Even as CEO flying back, a headhunter called me or a search person called me 2 weeks later, and I was open to it. And I left, but I would have said no to that call if I hadn't gotten so drilled unnecessarily. And so patience is really important. And then truthfulness, I think, is the one that's toughest. And even though you didn't ask us, I'll add one more, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Is kindness, I think, is the most misunderstood word. Because kindness sounds like what we're talking about, our fear of being too nice all the time, right? What it really means is encouragement while you also give the truth, because truth balance kindness. So it's kind of grace and truth kind of balance. Research says, and Dr. Henry Cloud writes a lot about this, you need 5 positives for every negative to see yourself as an effective employee. The truth is our minds are wired and human beings are wired. We tend to go to the negative. We tend to be negative to other people. And if we aren't 5-to-1 positive negative, they'll probably slowly sink away. So it's really important to spend that time encouraging other people. Jack Hershon did it through handwritten notes that he would send out 3 a day, over a 40-year career. There's thousands of handwritten notes from Jack Hershon out there. That's the kind of purposeful leadership that I'm talking about in the book, is that it doesn't just happen by happenstance. You have to have good behaviors, good skills, good quiet time. It's a very purposeful set of behaviors that we're teaching. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think it's truth, patience, and kindness are either the 3 toughest or the 3 most misunderstood.
Love that. What are some of your favorite stories and examples, maybe from Hershon or SeaWorld or anywhere you've experienced on a positive note or a negative aspects related to any of these 7 principles?
Yeah. Gosh, and I've never been asked that before. And I love that question, but the answers are jumping into my brain quickly. And that is the one that's the most positive is probably on selflessness. After in the 2007, 2008, implosion, when the world was going out of business, and Lehman went out of business, and the theme parks, we had 35% drop in sales in a week. And we had just bought 3 companies. We were up against our debt covenants. We were looking at maybe, having a real cash crunch issue. So we had to cut literally 50% of our cash flow. And the team got together, meaning the expenses. I said cash flow, but 50% of our expenses to preserve cash. And our team got there in about 37 minutes. But part of the plan was to lay off about 300 people. I gave them a day to think about other options. And the management team came back and they said, well, not only will we all take pay cuts, because we did discuss management team taking pay cuts, but that still led to 350 layoffs. They came back and said, the entire management team and the next level down will all take pay cuts so we don't have to lay anybody off. Wow. And then that went to another park. And pretty soon the whole company, other than a few corporate jobs, we didn't have to lay anybody off. And that was, and even at, I'll just say this about the corporate positions, even there, we gave them 6 months notice. We let them look for a job while they had a job, and everyone but one had a job before the 6 months was up, and we helped that one person get one. So it's how you go about doing it that's selfless. And I was so proud of our team. I think on the other side, trust. I just took trust for granted, obviously, Darren. Well, not obviously. When I was at Hershon, I was there for 13 years. I loved the Hershon family. I loved working there. I trusted everybody. when I went to SeaWorld, I forgot or underestimated what it's like to work for a board and a few senior leaders that didn't buy into a LoveWorks kind of culture.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you about that because you went from a privately held Christian-led company to, and I don't know what the ownership dynamics of Sea. Is it publicly?
It's public. It's public, and it was a mess. And I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, so no. What was that? What was that like? In related to the principle that you were gonna.
So I think the first question that you didn't ask for, but it's kind of like, why did I even do it? Right? I mean, I love the Hershans. I love what I was doing there. Part of it was personal. I just felt I had done what I was supposed to do there. But part of it was because I really wanted to put LoveWorks in a public company, right? It's definitely harder. No one would argue it's easier because you have 90-day results to the Wall Street hounds that don't care about culture.
Yeah. And this was when SeaWorld was really
in trouble,
in a negative spotlight, right?
Yeah, the CEO before me was asked to leave because they lost 50% of their cash flow. Blackfish was out, negative film about the company. We had some negative legislation that was actually trying to outlaw breeding of killer whales in the whole country. Nancy Pelosi was behind, not Pelosi, but Feinstein. Sorry. Anyway, we were in some real hurt, and So I wanted to bring these Christian principles into a public company. And the truth is, if I had time, and we don't, but to really dig into the numbers, our engagement scores went up every year. And when I left, our sales were up 12%. California was up 50%. We had a bad year the year before, but we were really trending in the right direction. Where I got into big trouble was I got into trust issues with the board. To make a long story short, I didn't agree with what they were asking me to do. I thought it was not in the best long-term interest. They had their opinion, and they're fine. We disagreed, and not with the whole board, but with a couple key ones. And I think the board turned over 100% while I was there. I had two different chairmen, so there was just never an opportunity to build that unified team. And so that's the part of my story that changed in the second book versus the first. I would tell all your listeners, if you can make a difference at any level of the company. And even if your ownership is just passive and you're not sure they support you on it, but you're getting the job done, everything's quiet, you're good. But if you have someone that you feel is actually not looking after your own best interest, has really their own best interest in mind, not maybe the company's, and you don't trust them or they're abusive to you verbally, that's the time to cut and run. And I think, if anything, I maybe stayed too long trying to make it work, and it cost me very dearly. My health, working all the time. I mean, to make a long story short, within 6 months, I had been married 30 years. I lost my marriage and my job at SeaWorld within 6 months because of a lot of my own unhealthy decisions, and just numbing the pain of it, working 20 hours a week, 7 days a week. So it costs me so dearly that I feel like every podcast I'm on, every time I communicate, I want to be able to tell young leaders, be careful what you wish for. On one hand, because if I had just said, I'm where God's calling me, I don't need to leave, I don't need to prove anything about being in a public company, I think having that on my checklist or bucket list of being a public company CEO was just, in the end of the day, cost me a great, great deal. And I see so many young folks say, I'll talk about being entrepreneurs and making millions off the internet or whatever. That's not bad in of itself, but I think we just have to be careful what we wish for. And I go into all that in the book. I don't mean to belabor this podcast with that tough story, but there's a way out. The good news is I'm 5 years out of the darkness now, and I feel I'm getting back, but it was a really, really tough period because of, I think, not being aligned with people that I should have been aligned with.
Yeah. I mean, it's that principle of being unequally yoked, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you got, as the CEO, you were so used to being able to working with owners that had a shared worldview, and now you're with people that they don't see it that way, right?
Right. And the good news is I at least was able to help with the frontline folks, and we did turn the business around. But the speed at which we were doing that, the owners wanted something more dramatic, and that's their right. And I'm not, look, they made their decision, and that's fine. It all worked out tremendously well for me. I'm certainly glad I'm not running a theme park company in this pandemic. But
oh my goodness.
I just didn't want to go that without at least touching on that issue, that it is the best solution is to be around owners and senior leaders that support you in leading with love, but you still can have a huge impact even if they don't.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like just a very painful experience. But now you're teaching, you're coaching, you're consulting, speaking, writing, living the dream in a lot of ways. What's keeping you busy nowadays?
It's exactly what you said. My passion, as I hope you can hear in my voice, I lived 20 years, I feel, doing it the wrong way, and still I had secular success, but I didn't feel at peace every time I went to work.
Yeah.
And once I learned the principles that the Hershins taught me, which is obviously Jesus' number one commandment, I shifted from, here's the best way I can say it. So many times in church, the preaching is you must go out and disciple people. They talk about the Great Commission. The facts say only about 3% of secular Christians proselytize or try to convert people. I think that's actually true. It's probably 3% or less, because the only way you really proselytize is to love other people. So I shifted from being guilty about not fulfilling the Great Commission to feeling completely fulfilled, because I felt like I was fulfilling the greatest commandment in how I treated people. So I want to spend the rest of my days on this earth to help other companies with Love Works, speak about it, that people know if they're a young person like I was working in the auto industry, there are ways you can do it. You can minister to anybody, no matter what role you have in life, whether you're a parent of a family or whether you're running a Fortune 500 company and everything in between. I don't think God asks us to love just at church or just at home. He asks us to love our enemy. And that's a tough calling, but the Love Works principles show that it can be done. So that's what I'm doing. I'm loving it, and I feel very, very blessed.
How can people get involved with what you're doing?
So probably the easiest is my website, joelmanby.com. I blog, I write about this issue. Right now, we're focused a lot on crisis leadership, obviously with Corona. So if they, with the COVID virus, if they want to buy the book through the website, there's a 3-part series on crisis leadership that comes free with that. It's the same price as Amazon and all that. But that's probably the best way to go. The book's available on Amazon and Audible as well. But that's where they can connect with me, and would love to know how I can help people take this concept further. I think the one thing that I probably didn't make as clear as I need to is almost everybody has a set of values on a plaque. Cheryl Batchelder from Popeye says we have a plaque problem, and 90% have words on a plaque. Only 10% of organizations have processes of how to back those words in their company. And then when I talk about, we taught it, we paid people, we discussed it with them, you had to have the be goals and the do goals right to be successful at this. And that's where the magic is. It's not just the words, it's the process behind them. And that's where I spend most of my time consulting and helping other companies.
Yeah. In this COVID crisis environment that we're in, as we're wrapping it up here, what would be your advice for business leaders on, because I know you teach a lot on crisis leadership. What is your message right now for business leaders?
How long of an answer do you want? 2 minutes? I'll give you the 2-minute version. I could go for an hour on that. I'll apply them back to the words. I always like to apply them back to love. On the truthfulness side, as one of the words, I see leaders that I talk to on the phone. They want to be truthful, but they also feel like they want to give certainty to their employees. I don't want them to think they might lose their job, or I'm not, but I don't know what's going to happen. And so instead of giving them certainty, I think we have to give clarity. And there's a difference. None of us have certainty about what's going to happen. But and they can read a lie or a putting frosting cake on a pig, so frosting on a pig in a hurry. So you must be dreadfully honest and give clarity, not certainty. I think the other thing on trusting, which is another word of the 7, I see so many leaders take control. The more we're in crisis, the more autocratic it becomes, when actually that slows decision-making down, especially in bigger companies. So it's actually more important to delegate. And the tip I would give there that I've seen be really effective in a crisis, instead of sticking to your normal org structure, I've seen the most successful companies kind of break up what do we have to do today to save the business in the crisis, like the operating team, cutting costs, just doing the best you can, versus the team that's looking at the vision of how do we pivot based on this pandemic. And if you try to put that all in your normal management team structure, I've seen it just not work. It moves too slow. The skill sets aren't right. So those are just 2 off the top of my head things that I've seen in this crisis. And the last thing I'm going to say, because I think it's a great way to end as you're trying to wrap, is forgiveness. But it's not forgiveness of others, it's forgiveness of ourselves. And none of us feel like we're leading like we want to lead right now. It's very fragmented. People feel left out. The Zoom calls are driving us crazy. We can't have the water cooler conversations as much. We are leading in unprecedented times. And I think we have to forgive ourselves. We have to get our rest. An exhausted leader is not a great leader. And take care of ourselves, or we're not going to be able to take care of our own employees. And I see a lot of people that are on the edge of completely burning out, really frustrated. I think suicide rates, depression, all those things are going up. So I beg of people to take care of themselves and remember God is the only one. Jesus' love is the only thing that can give us contentment. And there are no certainties in this world, and there never really have been. So I think just forgiving yourselves for not being perfect, and then loving on your team.
Yeah. And I love that principle about providing clarity, not certainty, because who of us can provide that certainty to people? We don't know what is going to happen in the markets tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen with the government tomorrow, but we can trust God and be clear about the reality that we're facing, well, and right. And also be clear about that there are better days ahead, that there's hope, that there is.
In the end of the day, there is hope, Darren, because there will be a vaccine to this thing within 6 to 12 months. And I think we're going to bounce back really quickly, but it's going to be extremely painful on certain sectors. And we just have to get through it. So it's, I feel for a lot of people right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Love Works, 7 Timeless Principles for Effective Leaders is the book. And Joel Manby, MANBY.com is the website where you can read some of Joel's articles. And I know you can also get the book there as well. Joel, this is just packed with value. Thank you for your time and your leadership and just providing an example of what's possible for kingdom impact in the marketplace. Sure appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Darren. I really am. I'm really captivated by what you're trying to do as well. Obviously, you're singing from the same hymnal. So keep doing what you're doing, and just know that you're right on target. You're spot on with what you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Thanks, Darren.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can share your feedback and get more information to help you partner with God in business and disciple your company, your industry, and your community at theologyofbusiness.com. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Highbridge Books and Media, a media agency specializing in publishing and promoting the world-changing ideas of inspiring thought leaders through book publishing, website development, publicity, email marketing, social media management, podcast management, and video-based course publishing. Take the next step to share your message with the world by contacting us at highbridgemedia.com. Thanks for listening, and keep partnering with God in your business.